So we all have a purpose, right? We're here on purpose. And I want to look at the word purpose for just a minute before we get into things. The noun of purpose, the reason for which something is done or created or for which something exists. And the verb of purpose is one's intention or objective. So whether it's mowing the lawn or negotiating a peace treaty, whether it's changing the world or returning a shopping cart, there's a reason for each of us being here. And we're here on purpose. Okay, so just to take some of the pressure off from that statement, let me just say that some of us may not know what our specific purpose is, or if it's specific.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, you can relax now. And that's where patience comes in. That's that running theme of patience. You're going to hear another theme that we've talked about before coming back up to as well. But I want to look at this for a minute of what our purpose is, not knowing what our purpose is, wondering what our purpose is. And I want to take it back again to Vincent van Gogh. So here was a man who thought, he was convinced his purpose was to be a pastor. That's why he was here. He was going to be a pastor, and he was passionate about this. And when that didn't work out, he shifted his focus to artwork, which he'd always been doing. It just wasn't what he thought was his purpose. And during his lifetime, he didn't know if it was his purpose. The man never sold a painting while he was alive. He was kind of a failure at what he was doing. But he continued to paint and he continued to draw. And he also wrote letters with his brother Theo. And so now, in retrospect, he may not have been clear about his purpose, but those of us who've been moved by his work and have read his letters and experienced his life, we're very clear about what his purpose was. And for me, it was threefold. It was to move us with his vision of the world. It was to soften us with the sadness of his heart. And it was to inspire us with the passion of his being. And personally, I think that's a pretty amazing purpose resume. Like, if that was going to be my purpose resume, I would pick those. So it's good to know that, we're going to have moments where we stumble. We're going to have moments of mistakes. And it's okay, because God, the universal, the love, the creative force, the one, the essence, whatever we call it, does not make mistakes. Okay, 2 mistakes. If you've seen the movie Oh God, one of my favorite movies, whenever I hear people say God doesn't make mistakes, I hear George Burns in my head from Oh God saying, okay, there were 2 mistakes. The ostrich, which is a silly-looking bird, and the avocado, I made the pit too big. Besides those 2, though, God did not make any mistakes. And so what's more, in addition to that, if some folks are uncomfortable putting it all on this God outside or God wherever, we are co-creators of our lives. We have to remember that we are in cahoots with this essence, with this creative force. We're one with it. And so we're participants. And so whatever we do, we are choosing to do. We are constantly making choices. And wow, some of us are making choices, And they do define our experience, and we continue to choose. So then our experience changes, and then we choose again, and then we choose again and again. So that means, deep breath, nothing really ever happens to us. It totally sometimes looks differently. It definitely feels differently. Except that if we believe in this first idea of co-creation and choicefulness, then the second idea of things happening to us doesn't fit. They'd be in conflict with each other. So we're participants in our life and the directions that our choices take them. And so that means nothing happens to us. So somehow, without blame or shame, and sometimes with a little bit of an ouch, we come to this understanding of, oh, I co-created this experience. Oh. So when I was 12, I met this woman named Amy. We were in 7th grade together, and we became very good friends. And we stayed friends all through high school, post-high school, the whole thing. And she would always come home to Cleveland for Christmas and New Year's, because she was living in Boston at the time. And the New Year's of '94, she said, hey, I'm going to head with Leslie and my other friend. We're going to go to New Orleans and spend New Year's Eve in New Orleans. And I'm like, that's great. Have a great time. And so at about 11:10 on New Year's Eve, Amy, Leslie, and their other friend, who I can't remember her name, and I apologize, went to a palm reader. And just to clarify that, well, I'm sorry. So first, Leslie had her palm read, and the woman was very specific, the lines and the stories, and very specific information. And then the second woman went, again, very specific information about what was happening. And then Amy sat down. Now, Amy had recently turned her life around. She had been in a very dark space, and she had been moving through some addiction issues, and she was in recovery. She's, strong again and clear again. She was writing again. She was feeling really, really good about the new birth of her life. And so she sat down with this woman, and Leslie told us later, the woman's face went completely white. And she said things like, well, you've been going through a really rough time, but now you're moving into a time of peace. And Amy was like, is that all I get? And she said, well, you've been in a darkness, and now you're moving into light. And it was this very vague, very generalized thing. So they left. 20 minutes later, they were walking down Bourbon Street. People were firing guns in the air for New Year's Eve, forgetting that gravity works. And Amy was hit at the very top of her head and went down and was gone. And her friends didn't know what happened because it happened so instantly. She had jet black hair. There was no blood. They thought she'd passed out or was having a seizure. They didn't know. They got her to the ER, and when they moved her, someone touched the top of her head, and there was a little bit of blood there. So coincidentally, there was a gentleman working in the ER who looked at her and went, oh, my God, that's Amy Silberman. He was somebody from our high school. Somebody who'd grown up in Cleveland and gone to high school with us and recognized her. And so she was in loving hands. And she was immediately put on life support. And then the miracle happened, which was everything in her body was able to be donated. Everything. She was like, everything. So there are pieces of Amy all over the place. Someone is, seeing through her eyes, breathing through her lungs. It's everywhere. So Amy's legacy reflected a purpose that I don't think she was ever aware of. And there are people who truly appreciate Amy's life because it allowed them to live and allowed them to live more fully. And because there are no accidents and nothing happens to us, as painful as it was for those of us who loved Amy, we knew that she was right where she needed to be. So this story always draws people's questions of, well, so then do you believe in predestination? Like, was that her path? And, the jury's kind of out on that for me. Because in moments like that, it gets a little confusing. I see the contradiction, and I also process that contradiction. Because, yes, there is a plan for our lives. I do believe that. And we're in a universe of choice. So that plan could look like this, and then we choose, and then that plan goes here. It's like train tracks where they do the switch and the tracks go there. So because I'm still in Earth School with all of you, we haven't graduated yet, which is great because we're all here. Because of that, there's still some things that I'm figuring out. So was that moment for Amy? Did she consciously choose to go to New Orleans because that was supposed to happen? I don't know. I don't think she knew, but that's a whole nother piece. It's probably a whole other talk. So there goes. So we are always making choices. We are always making choices. And we continue to choose in each moment. We choose our next step. We choose our next adventure. We choose our next word. Thank God this fall, Heather and I decided to choose not to move. Because for the last 3 Septembers, we've been packing and moving. And it's like, oh my God, it's September. Shouldn't we be packing the house? You know, it's like, oh no, we're not moving. Oh, phew. You know, and so a lot of times, not a lot of times, often these choices will be made without our full awareness. We're actually choosing all the time. Sometimes we're not awake to it. And so we see and we learn through experience, or when we're being taught differently than we're used to, that until we stop choosing unconsciously, things happen. And then once we know and we choose consciously, things unfold. See the difference? It's tricky, but there it is. And so sometimes we don't know what's going to come next, and yet when we're choosing consciously, it's, oh, now that's happening. As opposed to choosing unconsciously and going, why is that happening? It's 2 very different experiences. And either way, this came to me in the shower and I was so excited about it. Either way, the outcomes are not accidents, they're results. Oh, come on, give me something. Thank you. I was very excited about that. So when I first was becoming a practitioner at the Alaska Center for Spiritual Living, I had taken my written test and I was getting ready to do my panels where I was going to meet with other practitioners and become a practitioner. And a bunch of us were sitting around talking about, well, what do you think your ministry's going to be? What do you think your ministry's going to be? And for years I'd been called to prison ministry. I'd done some in Cleveland, Ohio, when I wasn't a minister or a practitioner, I'd just done it. And I was really called to do that work. And so I said out loud, I'm pretty sure it's going to be prison ministry. The day of the panels, I showed up at the center, and Linda Kajiwara, who is now Reverend Linda, but at that time she was a practitioner with me, she walked up to me and she goes, this letter just arrived from an inmate in Utah. Welcome to your prison ministry. Random. It showed up randomly that day. Some guy in Utah had gotten a hold of a Science of Mind magazine and decided, oh, there's a center in Alaska. I'm going to write there. And so it was amazing because this kid was young. He was like 22. And he'd worked as a security guard, so he carried a gun. And he came home from work one night and walked in the house, and his sister's boyfriend was actively beating up his sister. And so he said, you know, you got to stop. And the guy turned to him, twice his size, very big, started coming at him. So the kid grabbed what he had, and he ended up killing the guy. So at 22, he's in prison in Utah, probably for a long, long time, thinking, I'm a killer, and I'm going to be this thing forever, because nobody will let me not be it. And he thought that until we met. And that's why it was no accident that the letter arrived on the day that it was supposed to, and I wrote to him, and it was just absolute divine timing of me and this gentleman, you know, communicating with each other. And so it was really exciting. So Rachel Naomi Raymond wrote this in her book, My Grandfather's Blessing. Over the years, I have seen the power of taking an unconditional relationship to life, a willingness to show up for whatever life may offer and meet with it whatever life may offer and meet with it rather than wishing to edit and change the inevitable. Perhaps the wisdom lies in engaging the life you have been given as fully and courageously as possible and not letting go until you find the unknown blessing that is in everything. How do we find the unknown blessing that is in everything? I went to a book that I admire greatly. I mentioned it a couple weeks ago. It's called Guidance from the Darkness by Mary Murray Shelton. Fabulous book. And she talks about guidance and how guidance is like a radio. And when you're listening to the radio, if your station's not tuned in precisely, it's staticky, and it's hard to hear, and it's just messy. And it's not the radio's fault that it's doing that. The radio's just being a radio. So the static isn't a problem for the radio while it's driving us crazy. And the adjustment to clarifying the sound is on us. We turn the knob and we fine-tune it to get the message. So with a few simple adjustments, that message becomes clear to us. So this is the other recurring theme that keeps coming back, which is paying attention. Paying attention. Patience, paying attention. So we pay attention to those signs of synchronicity, to those moments of coincidence, and we become open to the what's sort of but not yet quite really magical aha moments, where some of us go, well, of course, that's just spirit doing its thing. That's us fine-tuning, removing the static. And then everything becomes clear, and all of a sudden all the connections become clear, and that web of our oneness becomes clear, and we're right where we need to be, right when we are there. So I want to close with a story, and I haven't gotten through this story yet without crying. So we're gonna hope that this is the lucky one. Speaking in first person, I was at the corner grocery store when I noticed a small boy, ragged but clean, hungrily eyeing the fresh-picked green peas. I paid for my potatoes, but I was drawn to the display of the fresh green peas. And I couldn't help overhearing the conversation between Mr. Miller, the store owner, and the ragged boy next to me. "Hello, Barry. How are you today?" "Hello, Mr. Miller. I'm fine, thank you. I'm just admiring those peas. They look really good." "Oh, they are good, Barry. How's your mom?" "Well, she's fine. She's getting stronger all the time." "Well, good. Is there anything I can help you with?" "No, I'm just admiring those peas." "Well, would you like to take some home?" "Oh, no, I have nothing to pay for them with." "Well, what have you got me to trade for those peas?" "Well, all I got is my prize marble right here." Mr. Miller says, "Well, let me take a look at that." "Well, she's a dandy." He shows it to him. He says, "Whew, I can see that. But the thing is, that marble's blue, and I kind of like red. Do you have a red one at home?" "Well, not exactly, but it's almost red." "All right, well, I'll tell you what. You take the sack of peas home with you, and the next time you come in, let me take a look at that red one." "Well, I sure will." So Mrs. Miller, who'd been standing nearby, came over to help me, and with a smile she said there are 2 other boys just like him in the community, and all 3 are in some really dire circumstances. And Jim just loves to bargain with them for peas and apples and tomatoes or whatever, and then they come back with their red marbles. So they always come back with their red marbles, and he decides he doesn't like red, and he wants a green one. So he sends them home with another bag of produce and says, "Bring me a green one." And then an orange one, and it goes on and on. So I left the store smiling to myself, really impressed with this man. I never forgot the story of him and the boys and the bartering for the marbles. I moved away shortly after that, and several years went by, and I learned through some friends back home that Mr. Miller had died. And there was going to be a visitation, and several of my friends were going, so I flew into town so I could go with them. And we came into the mortuary, and we joined the line of all those waiting to give their condolences to Mrs. Miller. And ahead of us in line were 3 young men. One was in an army uniform, and the other 2 wore dark suits with white shirts and ties, looking very professional. They approached Mrs. Miller, and they hugged her, and they kissed her on the cheek, and they spoke briefly with her, and then they moved on to the casket. And each young man stopped briefly and placed his hand onto Mr. Miller's hand in the casket, and then they left the mortuary wiping their eyes. So our turn came, and I reminded Mrs. Miller of who I was and the day that I was in the store and the story that she had shared. And Mrs. Miller took my hand, and she led me to the casket, and she said, "Those 3 young men who just left were those boys that I told you about." And they were just telling me how much they appreciated all the time that Jim traded with them. And now at last, when Jim can't change his mind about the color or size, they came to pay their debt. Right now, Jim would consider himself the richest man in the world. With loving gentleness, she lifted her husband's hand, and resting underneath were 3 exquisitely shining red marbles. We are right where we need to be. Everything is just as we have co-created it, and we can choose again to change it. And as we become more patient and we pay closer attention, we realize there are no accidents. We're right where we need to be, and we can live each moment on purpose. Let's pray. Okay. So just taking this time to soak in the power of that story and the feelings that's brought up to us. That feeling of knowing that circulation is something that feels good. Knowing that connecting with other people feels good. That giving from our hearts, sharing with each other in love, opening up to the possibility of spirit is good. And so right now in this moment, I know that spirit is the only activity that's taking place. It's the only activity that's taking place, and it is rising up to the surface for each one of us, bringing that question to our head: what is my purpose? Why am I here? And resting in the comfort of knowing that we don't need to answer that, because the answer is coming through who we are, how we live. Emerson told us that who we are speaks louder than our words, than what we're saying, and it's so true. As we allow room for spirit to do what it does through us, all the other stuff falls away. Any fear or hesitation or confusion falls away from us, whether it's resulting in conflicts at work or relationships or worries about financial support. When we make room and make space for spirit to do the work that it's doing, and we're actually paying attention to that work being done through us and as us, we're always right where we need to be. And our reason for being is clear. Sometimes it's just to hold the door open for the person behind us. Sometimes it's just to say thank you. Sometimes it's just to think about a friend and let them know through your thought that you're with them and connected. And so right now, I hold that space for each one of us. I hold that question, just like I hold my stone. There is an answer to why we are here. And it's being revealed in every moment of our lives. Also holding in prayer today some folks who sent requests in. I'm not going to name them. I'm simply going to know that for each of them who have let me know that they are wanting to know the truth and can't see it just yet, I am affirming and declaring and stating right here and right now that I know the truth for them. And the truth is God is present. Spirit is acting, and good is being revealed in whatever way. Regardless of what we see, it's good revealing itself. Blessing each and every person here, giving thanks for the experience of Spirit Stone, giving thanks for the experience of what we are about to enjoy in our potluck, giving thanks for the generosity and the community and the love. Just being thankful for all of life and getting ready for whatever comes next, saying yes. And so it is. Ashe, Amen, Ashe, Ashe.